Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harrison. Each week, I'm joined by Husky Harry, huggable homos who love film, to talk about something near and dear to our hearts, that, of course, being movies. It's so important to us. It's in the title of our podcast, guys. Right? I don't know if that underscores it enough, and yet I feel like it does. We've got a big show coming up for you this week. We are going to be reviewing It, the newest take on the Stephen King novel of the same name, as well as the TV miniseries from 1990. And I've got some pretty great guys joining me tonight to help us with this review. As usual, I'm joined by my cohorts in crime, Jim Pugliafco. Welcome.
Thanks, and welcome to the podcast, everyone.
And Will Lindis is here as well. Welcome, Will.
Hey there, movie boys and movie girls. So glad to be back with you this week.
All right. Glad to have you both here. We're also joined by a very special guest who you may recognize from some of his film work available on the internet. Dan McCord, we're very excited to have you back with the Movie Bears podcast. Welcome, Dan.
Hello. How are you guys? Hope everybody's had a good weekend.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was a good one.
I mean, it went by fast, but yeah. it was a great weekend.
We had a really great weekend. We've had a couple really great weekends, and they've gone by in a blur. And you know what I mean by that.
Oh yes, for sure. This weekend we had our good friend Sam White, who's a fan of the show, in from Denver, and we actually got to see the movie we're going to be talking about this week, It, with him. So we also watched the miniseries from the 90s with Sam and had an in-depth book discussion. So it's been like an It weekend, you guys.
Almost.
And it's stretched into Monday, but I'm really excited to have this conversation with you boys. So here's what we're going to do. Usually we like to either do a double feature, or if we're not doing a double feature, have some movie news. This week, because we have the wonderful Dan McCord with us, and because it's a big movie, there's a lot to talk about, a miniseries, a book, a new movie. We are going to use the whole time for one review. I think I can count on one hand the number of times we've done that. But I think it's going to be a good discussion. I'm looking forward to diving in. Before we do that, though, a couple of housekeeping items. One, don't forget to join us in the live chat. If you're watching us live on YouTube right now, you can go ahead and access that chat at the upper right of the video and join in the discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts on either the old miniseries, the book, the new movie. Say hello, and if your comments are YouTube appropriate, we may give you a shout out on air. And then two, we are going to be talking about it spoiler free for probably about 20 minutes or so, as we give you our initial impressions, whether we think it's worth seeing in theaters, and then we'll give you a fair warning before we take you to Spoiler Pound Town. So all of that said, Jim, Will, Dan, are you guys ready?
Here. Yeah.
Are you guys ready to venture into the sewers in pursuit of It?
Let's do it, losers.
I'm floating.
Right on.
Do we all get to have sex at the end?
I mean,
nope. Not anymore.
We'll get to that in the spoilers.
Not anymore.
You have to stay on with us, listeners, to find that out.
Oh goodness. Yeah, we'll save some of that discussion. In any event, here we go. Our discussion of It. All right, so Jim, do us a favor, if you don't mind, and
sure.
give us the basic setup of this movie, as well as your initial thoughts. Is this worth checking out when it's in theaters? Maybe waiting for rental, skipping entirely? What do you think?
Well, first I'll dive into what we're talking about. What is It? Anyway, It. What is It? Yeah, It is a new movie, or a new half movie, a new part one movie. I don't know. We'll talk about what it is. It's based on a Stephen King novel from 1986. I think his 18th novel. This guy's written so much stuff. He's written, not even counting short stories, collections, and novellas and stuff. he's written like almost 60, I think, like just big, regular novels. And then all the other stuff just, that adds up into the hundreds. So everybody, I think, knows Stephen King. Many of his books and works have been translated into movies in the last, 30 to 35 years or so from his movies. I mean, we have The Shining, we have Cujo, we have Stand By Me, which will probably come up again later on. But this movie, though, this novel, It, from 1960, I think it was like 1,100 pages. I was walking through the store the other day, and I actually saw the book on the shelf. And I went to pick it up thinking like there's 10 of them like there on the shelf. And I picked it up. It's like one book. It's like, I swear to God, this thing is like this thick, which is daunting in itself. And maybe telling as to why every time they've tried to make a movie out of this, it's been at least 2 parts. So, it was made into a 2-part television miniseries. So when we talk about the miniseries or the original movie, we're going to be talking about what was made in 1990 for TV, which I actually hadn't seen before, and I hadn't read the book. So this movie was kind of my first jump whole hog into this story. Now, I had known a little bit about it. I knew there was like this scary clown, and there was a bunch of kids, and that's about all I knew. But let me read the synopsis for you folks who maybe don't know the story, although there probably aren't many people who don't know it. So 7 young outcasts in Derry, Maine are about to face their worst nightmare, an ancient, shape-shifting, evil entity that emerges from the sewer to prey on the town's children. Banding together over the course of one horrifying summer, these friends must overcome their own personal fears to battle the murderous, bloodthirsty clown known as Pennywise. So there you have it. That's the I think the non-spoilery synopsis of this story. This one was directed by somebody named Andy Muschietti, who gave us a movie that I don't remember if we reviewed on the show. Maybe we did, called Mama. I don't remember if we talked about this on the show.
I think Mama might have slightly predated the show, but only by a hair.
Maybe a little bit.
Wait. Was Mama the Guillermo del Toro involved thing? Or
I think he produced it or executive produced it. Right. I remember a little bit about that. That was kind of like another appearance of kind of like the smoke monster kind of stuff going on, right? Anyway, this one was also co-written by Cary Fukunaga, who we know from a movie called Beasts of No Nation, which I love, Sin Nombre, the first season of True Detective, I believe. So he co-wrote this, and I think he was tagged to direct it at one point. I'm not sure, and I think that they transitioned to Andy Muschietti. So, like I said, from what we know, this movie is really also, just like the TV miniseries, is also the first of a 2-part movie, right? So let me see. The first one was a miniseries because it was produced for TV. So is this called a maxi series? What is this called? Like a I don't know. I don't know what we can call it. It's not a trilogy. It's a biology. I don't know. Whatever.
We could just call it a movie.
We could, except it's half a movie. No, it's half a movie. We're going to talk about that.
Duology.
We're going to talk about that. I guess you could look at it as a standalone movie, but I don't think many people really do. So I'd been aware of the source material, like I said, but only superficially. So going in, I know pretty much as little as almost anybody could. In the end, I sort of enjoyed this movie, but much more. It's got kind of 2 elements that are kind of mashed together, right? It's a childhood coming of age movie, and it's also a horror movie. And I think I really liked it for the coming of age aspects of it much more than the horror aspects of it. And that's where the kind of I think the coming of age is more of a complete story, where the horror movie is definitely something that's not quite there. It's definitely not fully there in this movie. And we could talk about the differences between this one and the 1991. And aside from a few distinct scenes, one at the beginning that stands out to me, I don't think it's that impressive to me as a horror film. Didn't really scare me, although I'm not one. I know a lot of people are like super afraid of scary clowns. That's not me. So I'm watching it and he's kind of creepy. Yeah, it's he's got it, and there's some scenes that kind of threw me back a little bit, but I've seen scarier stuff in the last year. The characterization of the Pennywise the clown was fine, I think. But we sometimes talk about how movies with strong antagonists have a villain problem. I think this movie has a big villain problem that for some reason nobody wants to talk about, but maybe we'll talk about that. I love the kids' performances in this movie. I thought they were all really solid, top notch. I was really surprised how much, with so many, usually, children performances, as we talked about before, they can be really bad, really pretentious. I thought the writing and the characterization and the performances here of all the kids were great. And we can run through the names if we want to. We had Jaden Lieber as Bill, Jeremy Ray Taylor as Ben, Sophia Lillis as Beverly. I thought was fantastic. Gonna have to watch for this actress's name in upcoming movies. Finn Wolford, I think he's the one who is from Stranger Things also. I'm not sure.
He played
That's
Richie.
right.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know him that well. I did see a little bit of Stranger Things. Great. Chosen Jacobs. Now there's a name that stood out to me. Chosen Jacobs as Mike Hanlon. But yeah, great performances all around by those kids. Overall, I'm gonna kind of get off the stage, and I know a lot of people want to talk. I'd recommend this as a fun end of summer movie. Based on the strength of these characters and as a coming of age movie, and just a few creepy scenes thrown in there. But yeah, I give this a soft recommend.
All right. So, Jim, it's funny that you mentioned the whole coming of age dynamic. I want to read a really awesome tweet that I saw over the weekend. And the tweeter said, the remake of Stand By Me was pretty good. Why did that creepy clown keep showing up?
I know. That was, I want to take that apart a little bit. That was me kind of trying to give my version of a hot take, right? But because that's what people do on Twitter, I guess. I think that's the way it's supposed to work. But still nobody pays attention. So, but I want to take those ideas apart a little bit and see what you guys think later.
Agreed. We'll definitely dig into that for sure. Dan McCord, you have been silent for far too long. What did you think? Spoiler free, of course, of it.
I'm running through images of clowns in my head, so I'm just kind of petrified at the moment. No, the overall, when I found out this movie was coming out, I'm not shy about the fact that I don't like clowns, and all of my friends at work know that I don't like clowns. So there have been pranks and balloons placed in my office and stuff like that, which is awesome. Good times to come into at 8 o'clock in the morning. The movie itself, I really agree. It was not as scary. The part that should have been scary wasn't as scary to me as it should have been. The stuff about the coming of age definitely plays a factor in it. There was a couple points in the movie where it was definitely harkened back to the miniseries, and the miniseries as a kid totally destroyed me. I was terrified of clowns from the time I was 8, and I couldn't stand over this shower drain for years. That movie. So it didn't have the same effect with this new one, but it's definitely a recommend. We went with, I think, 12 people. And the people sitting next to us, part of our group, it was like having a live action Mystery Science Theater 3000 the entire movie.
Oh boy.
Interesting. So
yeah, that's not good.
But it was good. I definitely say it would be a recommend. Like Jim said, end of summer movie, something to go out a bang with. I will say I've never gone back into the office after a movie and had so many people be like, what did you think of the movie? Was it scary? So it's cool to have that kind of, I guess, that kind of reputation of, if the movie's going to scare Dan, we should go see it. So
Dan, your answer to that question was like, what'd you think of the movie was, join us live Monday night and find out what I thought.
I actually did do that a couple times. Yeah. The rest of the time, it was like I didn't pee my pants. That was the answer. So.
Good.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, glad to hear that. 2 recommends so far. We'll have to see if that trend continues. Will, what did you think?
I'm going to add to that with a giant hearty recommend. I loved this movie. I think that it's hard to do an adaptation of a Stephen King novel because he is a guy known for being wordy. I love him as an author. He is the type of guy you can pick up like a 1,200-page tome, and you know that if there is a bush, if there is a table, if there's a guy walking by in the background, you're going to get a 4-paragraph description of that dude. And it always fleshes it out in a way that feels like it paints such a word picture for me. We then run into problems with so many of the adaptations based on his work, though, because it's really hard to take that and turn that into something that is both faithful but also concise. And we've seen so many awful versions of that, including that long stretch of miniseries in like the late 90s, like the Langoliers and Storm of the Century and all of those different things where they just weren't quite nailing it. What I love so much about this is I think they took another dense, complicated story and they told it in probably the best way possible. This book series is 2 stories that are happening kind of at the same time, bouncing back and forth between these 2 stories. And they've decided with the films to take one of those stories and tell it as this film and then tell the next one as the next film. And by splitting it into 2, it keeps the focus where it needs to be. You're absolutely right about the cast of kids in this. You know, you mentioned Finn Wolfhard from he plays Richie in this from Stranger Things, and I loved the lead in this. I guess all the kids are kind of the lead, but there was like the one leader kid. Jaden Lieberer plays Bill. That's the kid from like Midnight Special and St. Vincent. Like he's just been kind of making the rounds, and I think he does quite a bit of really solid stuff here. There's 2 elements to this story that are important to talk about, and it is the coming of age parts, which I think are the strongest parts. I think it's I'm okay with the statements of like, you know, the horror elements aren't as strong. I would also say that when you go back and actually like kind of read the story or kind of what the focus on, that the focus of this is a coming of age story set in this horror backdrop. So the horror elements are supposed to be back secondary to what the kids are actually going through, and they captured that here as they needed to. The other thing that I think is really important to mention is Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise is aces. I love this performance. Every time he's on screen, he nails it. One of the most gripping, interesting performances. It's hard to kind of be in the shadow of Tim Curry, who played this in the miniseries, and no one can ever replace Tim Curry. Like, you know, don't try. And so Bill Skarsgård puts forward a very different Pennywise than what we saw in the miniseries. And that's to its credit. It doesn't try to replicate what happened there. It takes the story as it appears on script, as it appears in book, and does something a little new with it. So this is a very, very, very hearty recommend. I'm looking forward to seeing the next thing from it. It's not my favorite Stephen King adaptation. There's probably about 4 titles that are higher than that. That said, I think there's been something like 39 or something like that Stephen King to TV or to movie adaptations. And for this one to probably crack the top 5, if I were to really look at all of them, is pretty damn telling. So yeah, go watch this movie. It's really good.
All right. So 3 big recommends. Well, Jim, yours is kind of a soft recommend. So if you average it out, it's a semi-recommend, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. But if we add my recommend, maybe it takes us to a full almost recommend here. I really liked this as well. I was a big fan of the miniseries in the 90s. Kind of to your experience, Dan, though, seeing this when I was 9 years old permanently traumatized me. I think it's why to this day, like, I am just terrified of like clowns and like you know, super crazy, like heavy, like makeup and crazy, like clown and, you know, ensemble. It's probably why I don't go to very many haunted houses because, you know, especially this year, can you imagine how much the Scary Clown is going to be coming back into its own? So yeah, Jim, we'll have to keep that in mind when it comes to haunted house time. But the movie traumatized me as a kid, and we actually rewatched the miniseries. Well, Jim watched it for the first time, but we watched it on Sunday, and it was after we had seen the original movie. And you'll remember, Will and I were kind of going back and forth with Jim a little bit, like, should he watch it before he sees the new movie? Should he watch it after? And Jim, maybe you can talk about your experience when we get to spoilers.
Yeah, definitely.
But for me, it was so interesting to watch the miniseries, because I hadn't seen it in years, guys, to watch it after seeing the new one. Because I think sort of like the kids and their memories of Derry, it had been so long since I saw the original miniseries that my memory was just very fuzzy. It had faded and gone dark on a lot of the different elements that made that up. Mostly the second, like, boring half of that miniseries. Guys, I don't know what they're going to do with the second movie because, like, the whole coming of age kid thing is my favorite part of the whole It franchise. And we'll talk about it in spoilers, but I mean, that's what this movie was. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with the second one, but I don't want to keep, you know, kind of rehashing things you guys have already said. So we're going to move to spoilers here in just a few moments. But I will say I totally agree with you. Performances across the board were really, really good. Some interesting creative choices with changing some of the you know, time period stuff rather than the kids being in the 50s. This time they're in the 80s. And I feel like for me, especially having been a fat kid in the 80s who was the new kid at school in the year that this movie takes place, I resonated a lot with the new Ben and what he was going through. And so, you know, I'm kind of like watching this new movie and I'm like, man, I'd totally be in the Losers Club. And then I'm like, man, I'd totally be like chased down and eaten by a killer clown. So I'm like, maybe I won't be in the Losers. I don't know. But it's a good movie. I definitely recommend that you go out and see it. If you're a fan of the original miniseries, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I really don't. I was scared going into this movie that, like, it was going to be awful. I was constantly drawing comparisons from what I could remember. And I mean, maybe a few minor quibbles, but I mean, for the most part, I think it's pretty on par. I really enjoyed it a lot. I hope you will too. I imagine everybody that's listening has probably seen it, but if you haven't, we are going to protect you from spoilers, so not to worry. We don't want to ruin your fun. If you choose to ruin your own fun, that's on you. But guys, how are we feeling at this point? Would it be a good time to move on into spoilers?
I think there's probably a couple of broad stroke things that we can mention pre-spoilers, but nothing too big. I think one thing of note is to kind of, this isn't a spoiler because this is part of the series itself. Like, this is a very prominent part of it. There is a large change in the time period that this story takes place versus the way it's appeared. You know, this story is set in 1989 versus the book, which is set in the late 50s, and the miniseries, which is set in the early 60s. Anyway, so there's definitely a change to the focus of this story, and I think that it's one of those things that I think it ended up working out quite well for the most part. There were a couple of spots where you could sort of see where it was lifted from, like, a kind of a harkening back to Americana type stuff, and it didn't translate to the 80s quite as well as it should. So someone coming into this very, very blind might actually, I could totally see someone not knowing what time frame this movie was set in if it didn't flash to 1989, because there are parts of it that do feel like very, like, especially some of the antagonist characters that feel very like late 1950s bullies as opposed to like 1980s bullies. But aside from that, I thought that they translated a lot into the 80s pretty well. I don't know. How did you guys feel about that?
I think they did a pretty spot on job. I mean, you've got kids running around in, like, you know, pink and green parachute pants and skateboards. Like, I mean, visually speaking, at least, it definitely had that 80s vibe for me, even if there were some maybe intentional homages to some of you know, the earlier time frames. But Jim and Dan, how about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as in your face as like Back to the Future was, because that, you know what I mean? It wasn't like trying to push the 80s, like, oh, now we're in the 80s. Remember, we're in the 80s. It was, but I thought it kind of captured that time frame very well without going overboard. And I do like the fact that they shifted it, although it does, obviously it makes sense that they shifted it if you think about what part 2 is supposed to be. Yeah, I mean, and somebody asked in the things, he said, in terms of our recommendation, my real question is, and this is from Edward Chambers, my real question is it an IMAX/recliner, you know, movie, or a wait for next week when it's in the cheaper seats in theater? What do you guys think?
We saw it in just regular theater. I mean, I would probably go see it again in IMAX. I thought it was pretty good. I would like to see it on that big of a screen and see how it changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a visual event gala like, you know, like a Dunkirk or like a, you know, like a superhero movie or something that, like, you know, is designed to be full of like color and whiz bang and all sorts of things like that. So I think you can get away with the cheap seat theater type thing and have a perfectly fine experience. Also, so when you go to the IMAX, when you go to like kind of the comfy recliner seat thing, which I enjoy that type of setup a lot of times for this very reason, you tend to have a lot more of like a quiet, respectful audience, which is cool. I love people not talking. I think this one, as long as it's not like too outlandish or too out of the way, would benefit from being around people reacting audibly to the things that are going on. Like, you know, when you hear someone just like kind of shriek or like get startled audibly in their seat at something, like, I think there's something to be said for that. So I would actually recommend the cheap seats on this one. And that's not a knock against it. I think you'll get the best experience there.
Yeah, I think if you want the visceral audience reactions, you probably want to go on the weekend. And if you miss this first run weekend, then I would say wait. Also, there's part of this movie in the middle that gets a little sleepy for me. It's one of my minor quibbles. And if you're reclined back in those comfy recliners, I think you're just making it easier for the sleep to grab you. So I would say maybe that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about these bigger stadium seating with the wider like recliner seats where you got like 3 rows of room in front of you and in back of you. Chris Lopez, a friend of the show and sometimes special guest, previous host of the show, he said, I had the chatty quote, "Don't go in there, lady," behind me, and loved it. I'm like,
I'm jealous.
I'm jealous because I love that lady. I love to be in this kind of movie with that lady. We really I didn't get that experience. Unless somebody's right next to you in these theaters, you don't get that anymore. And that's kind of sad, actually.
The person
lady that was right behind us was the whole movie was like, don't go in there. Don't do that. Don't. These kids are dumb. I was like, okay.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, I mentioned earlier that we saw this with our friend Sam, who is actually in the live chat right now. So, hey, Sam, glad you made it back home safely. The lady that was sitting by him, he was saying, was like narrating the whole movie. So she'd be like, oh, he's going into the cellar. Oh,
there's going to be a clown in there.
The clown's going to come now.
And I'm like, damn it, I wish I'd been in that seat. Like, I wanted that audience reaction, but our theater was pretty tame.
Even though it was full, but it just wasn't much in, audible or visible reactions.
So Steve in chat says something that I absolutely agree with. He says, I go to the Draft House. They frown upon that in those theaters. And that's where I go to see my movies. I go to the Draft House. That is my religion. That is my church. And it's and I saw it for a 10 a.m. screening. So it was like maybe half full, but it's not as many as you'd normally have. It was the only time I could squeeze it in this weekend. And And we didn't really have a lot of that there. And so I did miss out on some of that experience. That person that audibly responds to movies, like, it doesn't work in most movies to me. Like 99% of movies, I don't want that person in the movies with me. But I remember when I saw the it was either the first or the second X-Men movie with some friends. There was this woman sitting next to me with her friend, and at one point, like, Magneto comes on screen, and she very loudly turns over to a friend and goes, "Hey, that's Magneto." And it's like, okay, we know. They've been saying his name all movie long. We don't need that announcement. That was a time that it was not helpful. But yeah, horror movies, I really wanted that. Now, what we did have this weekend, I was at the Draft House for some other movies this weekend, and it was at the same time that we did our clown-only screening. Clown-only screening. So there were a bunch of people walking around the lobby in, like, kind of creepy clown costumes, going to or coming from the movie, and it was amazing. I wish I could have been in that screening.
Oh my God!
I saw a tweet where a movie theater put up a sign at the ticket window, like, no makeup or costumes allowed at these screenings.
What?
Yeah,
No,
it did.
opposite. You want that?
Yeah, I saw it. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Not at all.
I don't mind it. I really don't mind it, as long as people. It's not the appearance of people that's going to freak me out. It's their behavior, right? If they're respectful of other people in the movie theater, don't ruin the experience, make it about themselves, then I'm all for it. But yeah, I don't know. I see it both ways. I can see it both ways.
So I do want to get to spoilers because we're quickly depleting our time and we haven't gotten there yet.
That's
one last thing before we do, though. Sexy voice of the Movie Bears podcast, Chris Lopez, asked earlier in the chat if any of us enjoyed the book. And I just wanted to say real quick, I read the book when I was a kid. I tried to read the book again, I think several years ago. And I only got about 400 pages in. I tried to start again before the movie. I just didn't have enough time. But I love the original book. Will, you read it, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, great book. There's nothing wrong with tapping out after 400 pages on any book. So, like, that you tapped out at the length of a book. Like, there are books that are shorter than your tap out point. So that's totally fine. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy it quite a bit for the fact that it is such a dense tome of both physical and metaphysical and kind of even the weird shit that we'll probably get to in 2 years. Like, I love that all of that was really expanded upon in this particular story.
Yeah, I had seen the original movie and then didn't read the book until last year, and it was while I was traveling. So a lot of the time I was reading it, I was alone in a hotel when I was traveling for work. So combine that with already being afraid of clowns, it took me the entire year to read that book. And yeah, there was a lot of stuff in that book.
I'm pretty sure you'd have to, like, Tumblr for a good 45 minutes after putting that book down before bed to, like, get it out of your head.
To get the clowns out of your head? Yeah.
Yeah, it was just because of the book. That's the only reason.
All right. So, yeah, I imagine as we get into our spoiler discussion, certain elements from the book are definitely going to be discussed. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how we feel on some of those things. But spoilers are incoming. So if you've not yet seen the most recent version of it, and you want to protect your virginal innocence where the film's plot is involved, now would be a good time if you are listening live to step away. Also, we will again be referencing the 1990 miniseries on TV as well. So if you haven't seen that either, what kind of person are you? Just kidding. But you may be getting some spoilers for the 1990 miniseries as well. So keep that in mind as you make your decision. Do I stay for spoilers? Do I not? Let that be what you need to decide. In any event, I've been awkwardly rambling to give you time to step away. If you're listening on digital tape delay, to hit the pause button, maybe skip ahead to our plugs at the end of the show. I'm stalling some more, you guys. I'm really trying to help you out. But we're just going to go ahead and do it. So spoilers are officially fair game. Where do you guys want to start?
It seems like a pretty good place to start here is the largest change in this story versus the book and the miniseries, and that's talking about the huge second half of this story that isn't here. Jim mentioned it a little bit kind of in the pre-section, you know, like, is this a bifurcated movie? Like, how does this fit? And we sort of had to talk our way around that. So this particular story tells book, miniseries, and such, tells the story of these kids as they're doing this thing with Pennywise the Clown and the Losers Club and in their youth. And then it tells the story 27 years later of them coming back to their hometown of Derry and kind of fulfilling this promise that if Pennywise ever comes back, that they're going to put a stop to it. So it shows them trying to remember their past and trying to reconnect with one another and reconnect to what happened so that they can stop this threat once and for all as adults. We don't have any of that here. The book series had both stories happening, kind of flipping back and forth between kids, adult, kids, adult, kids, adult. Whereas the miniseries told it basically in two parts, sort of like we have here. Just with some padding. There was some padding around it to sort of set the frame, but it was the bulk of the first half of it was the kids, and the bulk of the second half was the adults. Here, we don't get any adults whatsoever. We don't get any of the really metaphysical stuff. The ancient turtle, which is at war with the ancient Cthulhu-esque being that takes the form of Pennywise the Clown. We don't get any of that. We get a very grounded-ish version of that particular story here, with the writer and director basically coming out and saying that the next film, which is not due out till 2019, is going to focus on more of that like metaverse, really like weird existential stuff. And I'm all for that. My problem with the miniseries was always that I don't feel like they really captured the way I visualized or what I fell in love with kind of the second half of that story. I feel like the second half of that miniseries is a slog comparatively, and here we have a much more we have the potential in 2 years for a much more robust and brilliantly realized on screen version of that. So I'm actually excited for the second half, surprisingly.
So, Will, just to clarify for Jim, because I know, Jim, you haven't read the book, and there may be others listening as well. You're talking about the whole bit, like where, like Bill goes into the macroverse and meets like the god turtle, and like we get an explanation of like how Pennywise crashed to Earth like all of that stuff is what you mean by the metaphysical, right?
Exactly, yeah. Like the stuff that is kind of, I don't want to say deep lore because it's the characters interact with it directly in the story, but it's the stuff that is not just like a bunch of kids or a bunch of adults dealing with this monster. It's the stuff that sort of informs a lot of like the stuff that Stephen King was putting into play with the macroverse stuff here in this book actually influenced the entirety of his Dark Tower series very heavily. Like that's a playground that he really wanted to play in, kind of the existential realm between stories. And this is, I don't know if this is the first place we really got to see it, but this is one of the early places where we got to see sort of Stephen King's like kind of background passion project stuff coming to light.
I will say that they did bring in the turtle a little bit in the original miniseries. Like the wax, I think, was the turtle, the can. Where Georgie went down to get the wax. And then there was a couple times where they brought in the turtle for the new one too. So you had the Lego set that was Georgie's, that was a turtle. And then also like when they were swimming in the quarry, the turtle kind of brushed up against their leg and they just dived down and, oh my God, it's a turtle. So they're playing on it, and that's like
which made no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, in the book, they keep talking about how the turtle is going to help them, or the turtle. I don't remember the wording, but something about the turtle does the talking or something like that. Yeah. And that's where it's coming from.
So treat it more a little bit like book Easter eggs in the movie. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think my main problem with the main storyline in this, other than the coming of age, which I thought was really good, was this whole, first of all, the villain didn't appear to have any motivation at all other than going after kids. this movie did not explore that really. I mean, there was a little bit of history, like it showed a couple of like historical things. So you knew that this had happened before. That's all you knew, but you really didn't know anything about genesis of this evil. Usually horror movies will at one point or another, either the beginning, the end, the middle, will reveal that to you. So I kind of have to view this as a partial movie. It's not really a full movie when it comes to that story, because there's no, the other problem I had was stakes. I knew that after I got the impression, had a great first scene. That first scene with Georgie and the clown's there and he's talking to him and he's creepy as hell. And he like grabs Georgie and he rips his fucking arm off of his body like an 8-year-old kid or something. And it's like, holy shit, this movie is like going for it in the first 10 minutes. That's awesome. And then after that, I started to get the impression there's no stakes here. Like, these kids are not going to die. None of these kids are going to die in this movie. And a couple other characters, I think, met their demise, kind of peripheral characters. But it robbed the stakes. It didn't give me any motivation. So I'm like, I have nothing to fear in this clown other than the fact that he's creepy. And I think that kind of robbed this movie of a little bit of its effectiveness for me. And that's why I say it's kind of like half a horror movie to me.
So, Jim, what you're saying is this movie version of it was basically season 7 of Game of Thrones.
yeah, exactly. It felt like a partial thing. And that's too bad because, I think there's more there. And I think you can ask Brad, I was asking a ton of questions on the way home. I'm like, so when did Pennywise become like was he like, did a circus come to town or like what happened? And it was just, he didn't want to really answer me because he thought maybe a lot of that was coming in the next movie. And I'm like, well, that's really no way to come out of a movie.
Well, but also like, Sam and I knew we were going to watch the miniseries. So like, we didn't want to steal away some of what the miniseries sort of uncovers and explains. So we kept looking at each other and we're like, how do we dance around this without like ruining your experience, babe? So Will, I know you have something to say. Jim, I'm really curious, maybe as our next discussion point, maybe to kind of compare the two and get your perspective as the newest to both. Would love to hear that thought. But Will, go first.
I was just going to piggyback on that particular point there about I do think that there is a slight criticism. It was more of a quibble for me than I think it sounds like it was for Jim, but they hit on a lot of the explanation for the Pennywise stuff, but there was a little less connecting it together than there probably should have been. Like we got to see through one of the characters. In this case, it was Ben, who had uncovered the history of the town, that this happens every 27 years, and they were right on the verge of like kind of uncovering some stuff, and then they didn't quite get to it. And I think that it's, I mean, for me, it's I'm personally more okay with that, because I think with very large, crazy, metaphysical beings, as opposed to like, I'm a ghost or I'm a guy with a knife or something a little more basic, I feel like I don't necessarily need to know all the motivations of a kind of a being that has that is kind of incomprehensible behind me. It's sort of like knowing if you put the character of God in a movie, you don't have to explain all of the motivations of movie God, because he's a being that we can't comprehend in that movie verse. And same thing with this particular character here, but they could have given a little bit more to get people thinking about that. Like, I think they should have given enough information so that people can go, okay, I get it. I don't need to know all of these motivations at this point. And they were just shy of it.
I don't need to know all the motivation. I just need to know some. Like, give me something to grab onto. Other than, if other movies will rip apart because the villain is just there and he's here to take over the world. No one knows why. He's just there to do it. And we'll rip that movie apart. And this movie seems to be getting a pass on it. I think it's because a lot of the people who see this movie know the world. They know the universe. They already know that backstory. So they're like, I get it. I get what they're doing. But if you go in cold, it really does leave you out in the cold a little bit.
There's some of that. There's some of that, but I also think the nature of certain creatures, like the amount of motivation that I need for them as an audience member is going to change. If it's a guy who wants to take over the world, yeah, I want to know his motivations because I can relate with human being. I can relate with man who wants more power, and I want to know a little bit more about this. This is a being that has apparently been, at least from the movie's logic, even taking the other stuff out, has been living beneath, feeding off of the fear of a town every 27 years, causing some sort of catastrophe, and is able to take on the forms of all sorts of different random things. I'm not going to be able to know the motivations or personality traits of that character, nor would I, at least for me personal, would I expect to, the same way I would, like, you know, again, guy who wants to take over the world or guy who wants to murder that person over there, just because it's not a human being. It's not even a personified mostly as human being. It's something that's so far beyond that. It's almost a borderline Lovecraftian in some way. Like, you know, we can't know the motivations of the elder gods type situation.
It's sort of like getting to know the weatherman versus getting to know the storm, right? Like, you get the broad strokes, you kind of know how it operates, but you don't necessarily get the entire breakdown of like, this level of wind interacted with this level. So it's a weird line to walk. Jim, I definitely understand where you're coming from. And I think it's one of the reasons why I was kind of interested to hear your take on the miniseries versus this film, because I feel like maybe the miniseries had a little more room to introduce some of that. Would you agree with that, Jim? Do you think you still found it super lacking? Like, what was your thought?
This movie?
This movie compared to maybe the miniseries, since you haven't read the book.
Got a little bit more in the miniseries. As Will mentioned, the miniseries is structured differently, whereas in the first half, you do see some jump forwards to these kids as adults. And in the second half, you see flashbacks to these adults as kids. This movie decided to play it very linear and not give us any of the adult stuff. I guess you could call it the adult stuff in this movie. And so, like I said, as I'm watching the movie, I don't know where this is going. He's not killing the kids. You know, I didn't see any, there was no tension. About halfway through the movie, I'm like, okay, there's no tension in this movie. It had balls in the first 10 minutes and kind of lost its balls in the next 10 minutes, but it is following a novel, so there's got to be something there. I just don't know what it is. And I kind of felt out in the wind a little bit.
There was one other set of major changes, and that has to do with if we're taking it away from the horror elements and looking back at the kind of the coming of age story stuff, some of these characters had a bit of a change as well. Between, I mentioned Ben, he's the historian now instead of Mike, who gets a rewrite instead of being kind of the awkward history buff kid who is also dealing with like racial prejudice. Mike has a completely different story here. Ben gets to co-op some of his historical stuff. And I want to actually ask a question of Dan, just because I'm watching chat and I got to see him mention some things. The character of Beverly had some changes herself. And I see some of the points that you made here, Dan. Can you tell us a little bit about how you felt about, kind of new Beverly and kind of what the differences were and how you felt about those?
So with the miniseries, the Bev in that one, it always felt like she was very timid, very laid back, and up until the point of the rock fight and the actually going into the sewer and shooting the silver bullets, the silver rocks, whatever they were.
Earrings.
With this one, I mean, she knocks her dad out with kills him with the lid from the toilet. So, I mean, it's definitely more of she's tired of dealing with stuff and, pushes that to the front. Whereas the miniseries was very much like, just deal with it and keep going. It'll be interesting to see in the second part if it follows the same path as in the miniseries, where she is with who she ends up with in the miniseries. So it'll be interesting to see that kind of a relationship come through. But
yeah,
her change was definitely interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. And it's interesting and unfortunate in a way for me. I mentioned some minor quibbles that I had. I guess this would probably be the majorest of the minor quibbles. You take Beverly, who in the book and in the miniseries is like, I mean, she's kind of a tomboy, but she's the best shot with the slingshot. Like in the miniseries, the other boys are hitting like 2 of the bottles, maybe. And she's all like, gunslinger with a slingshot, right? But
the gunslinger.
In this new movie, she stares into the deadlights. She floats on up there, right? She's effectively removed from the playing field.
Mhm.
And, speaking of Ben, like we're in spoilers, it takes Ben basically like them pulling her down and Ben kissing her to get her to sort of wake up from her catatonic state. So we go from like badass Bev to like, trapped princess in a castle Beverly. And that kind of bothered me a little bit. It took a lot of her agency away.
It's weird for me because I felt both positives and negatives from it, because I feel like for every change that they made here, it's like they maybe took something away from a character, but they shuffled it to someone else and added something onto the original character. So when I look at it in terms of like a Sub-Zero type thing, like I feel like ultimately I came out pretty positive on the character changes here. They got rid of her being the best shot because they got rid of the whole like I've got to fire a silver dollar or a silver earring depending on which version. What they replaced it with was 2 things. They gave Mike, who has now lost like the history stuff, which was shifted over to Ben because architecture is less important now. They shift that over, and now now Mike gets to have the
bolt gun,
the bolt gun, which sort of replaces the silver bullet shooting things. And what Bev gets to replace the fact that she no longer is a shot. I feel like she was more so than in the book or in the miniseries. I felt like she was kind of the bruiser of the group. Yeah. Like if I were to say like any one member of the Losers Club could probably kick my ass in a fist fight in this movie, hands down, it was Bev. Part of it was, I think, compared like she and I think Mike were the 2 largest kids by a long shot, just in terms of just height and shoulder width. She gets a lot of like scenes where she's just like beating shit up with like pole, like rebar type thing, and so that's why like I also had a problem with the whole like awakened by a kiss thing, because it is very save the princessy. But on the other hand, it also is very like another thing that happens a lot of times in stories is to kind of boost the stakes at the end is you take your bruiser out in some way, shape, or form. Like you take your most capable fighter and put them on the sidelines so that the other characters don't have that to rely on. So for every one of those, like I find something I'm like, I wish they hadn't changed this, but then I can say, well, I see why they changed this, and this is a positive that came out of that.
I think there are ways you could change it though. Like, I mean,
without the kiss, like the kiss was.
That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like in the original miniseries, and granted, this happens later on, but like Bill revives Audra from her catatonic state by taking her for a ride on Silver, right? So like, I don't know, maybe you could have that be a thing or some kind of foreshadowing of that. I don't know, but I think the men like saving her with a kiss was just a little.
You could have saved her from the deadlights any other ways, and I agree with that. Like, I don't have a problem with her being sidelined by the deadlights. Like, I think that's important. I think the kiss, mainly because it didn't pay off much in terms of this story with Ben. I think that didn't really pull together quite as well. I also took issue with, and this is maybe just me being a little more pedantic, there was one more stark change at the end where we find out that all of, like, when Pennywise says they all float down here, up till now, it's been a reference to the fact that, like, the kids' bodies are like floating in like the sewage, like
in water.
I'm gonna kill you and you're gonna die down here. And now we see this scene, and now all the kids are like floating in the air, like the opening of The Leftovers. Like, and it's like, that's too on the nose movie. That was a quibble I had. Like, I wish they weren't actually physically floating there, because it wasn't bad. I didn't like hate it or anything like that. It wasn't like a grievous, but I did have a little bitty tiny eye roll at that.
Yeah. Did Pennywise actually eat the children? Because none of them looked very eaten.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Like there's just a bunch of like kids' bodies, like, you know, like, whereas I mean, I think he's already mentioned, like, I half expected them to, like, at the end, to some of them to come alive. Like, I was thinking, oh my god, this it did subvert my expectation here, and that Georgie did not come alive, right? Oh, by the way, I thought that scene was the most tense scene in the movie, other than Georgie's death, was Georgie's second death, I guess you could call it, with the bolt gun, when his brother had to, like, shoot him in the head because he knew that it wasn't Georgie. That was a pretty ballsy story move, I thought. I don't know if the book went into that. It wasn't in the first movie. But to see a young kid in peril like that of like violent, you know, of a violent death twice in one movie was pretty, I would say, pretty hardcore.
Well, and even, you know, beyond just like the violence, right, of the bolt gun to his head or whatever, there was also this element of like, is this Pennywise or is this Georgie, right? Because if, you know, Beverly was just hanging out, floating up there, maybe Georgie could have been too. Maybe Pennywise brought him down from floating up there, right? And so for a few tense moments, I'm like, oh my god, it was Georgie. Whoa, this movie has got some fucking balls on it. Holy shit. And then it was like, oh no, he's, you know,
really,
he's wise.
It kind of seemed like, as they were talking in that whole interaction, Bill, I don't remember what the wording was, but Bill asked a question and it sounded like Pennywise didn't answer it right. Like, if, you know, he was asking if what shirt was mom wearing when you died or whatever, and it wasn't like the right shade, and that it was just like that one little question was what tipped him, because it after one of the questions it sheared back to Bill, and he just had the look on his face like he was done. So maybe it clicked, and it wasn't, you know, he realized it wasn't him. The good point of that is that the kid at that point, Georgie, didn't have his slicker on, so every other time in the movie he showed up, he's had that yellow rain jacket. And up until that point. So maybe that's what was causing it to be like, oh, maybe this is Georgie. So,
and to that point, like you mentioned, the fact that we're kind of cutting back and forth between Georgie and Bill in that scene. And we've got, this goes back to Jaden Lieber as an actor. And all of these kids are, it speaks volumes to the director of this film that he was able to pull not just like one good performance out of one good kid, but all 7 of the losers turn in really solid performances. The kid they cast as Georgie is great. Like, you know, he's a little scene stealer when he's on screen. But yeah, to your point, like when they cut back over to Bill's face, to Jaden Lieber's face, and he has like this subtle shift in his demeanor, like the type of subtle shift in his demeanor that you would expect from a more mature, seasoned actor to have as they're internalizing like the things that their characters are going through. I think that added so much to this movie. This could have been a train wreck if these were just a bunch of really obnoxious, precocious kids running around in the sewers.
So a little story about the actor who played Georgie that I read today. I don't know what his name was. The kid who played Georgie. Oh, it was Jackson Robert Scott. I guess over the weekend, maybe he lives in Phoenix or something, but he showed up at the Alamo Draft House in Phoenix in his slicker and with a balloon for one of the screenings to watch with the audience. Yeah. And
that is so wonderful.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome. I'm surprised they actually let him watch the whole movie because he's still pretty young and it's an R-rated movie. But yeah. But of course, he did get his arm ripped off in the movie.
Speaking of an R-rated movie, one more thing we should probably talk about before, Jim, we get to a question I have for you. But the whole Beverly, like, why don't you all have sex with me to bring the group together thing in the book versus like the miniseries and the movie sort of veering away from that. Book purists, was that a mistake not to do that in the new movie, or do we feel pretty good about not having a Beverly gangbang scene?
I think I don't know that there are any book purists on that point. Maybe there are in some parts of the world. Even Stephen King like admits that like that was not the best of ideas. Like he was going for a specific thing at that point, and he was trying to write it from the angle of it being less of like a sexual act and more of like kind of a bridge connecting these kids to adulthood. The problem is that it's a age 13-year-old gangbang happening in the sewers, and no matter how you
how metaphysical you make it,
no matter how you interpret that other different ways, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of kids banging each other in the sewers. And so it's a problem. It is a problem. It did not belong in the book. It did not belong in this movie, and I'm glad that they not only did they omit that particular scene, but they also sort of omitted the stuff right around it, like why it was important. Like they were able to just sort of like, if anyone was a book purist and say, well, they changed that so they wouldn't have to do the sex scene, which again would have been dumb if someone said that. But they just got rid of that particular plot point. Like they need to do that to reorient themselves to find their way out of the sewers or what have you. No, that's not a plot point anymore. We can just go right past it.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading the book and I was reading along and I hit that scene. I was like, wait, what happened here? And I had to go back and like reread it. I was like, what? I don't think this is the same book. So I was really happy that nothing like that was, in the movie. But the one thing that kind of threw me off, like along the same lines, was the quarry scene where they're watching Bev suntan after they swam. I was like, this is a little awkward. Like they all kind of have to adjust themselves when she moves. I was like,
oh yeah,
that's a little
True story. I saw 2 comments on Facebook from people I know over the weekend who were like ragey upset that the Beverly gangbang was not included in the movie.
What?
Yeah, they're like, this is the original book. They're going for this darker, grittier. It should have been included. It's not faithful. And I was like really uncomfortable. I have since unfollowed these people, but I was really uncomfortable with some of the conversation that was
that can get uncomfortable really quick. And it's the only decision, right? Not to go down that path. I mean, a bunch of kids swimming around in their underwear. I mean, Stand By Me had that exact same scene. And that's why I say this movie had a lot of Stand By Me in it, I think. And Stephen King was writing these around the same time. And I think he was very kind of nostalgic for his childhood, and trying to capture that those feelings and emotions of growing up as a young kid and the whole coming of age thing. And I thought both movies handled that really well. I could see those movies all day long. I think they're really good. But one thing we know we've seen bad Stephen King movies. We've seen some good ones.
Dark Tower.
Yeah, but ones like the reason why something like The Shining stands out to me is that the director took it and made it something, didn't try to cover everything in the book, grabbed the major stuff and kind of made molded a unique story around it and made it interesting. I almost kind of wish they had done more of that here, rather than try to, I don't know whether they're trying to, stick to the material to please fans or please Stephen King. Because at the time, I think Stephen King hated The Shining, actually, when it came out, the movie The Shining. But here it is, probably considered one of his best adaptations to date. I mean, I wanted to one other thing. I wanted to Chris Lopez mentioned the best part of the 80s shift is they got to throw in a very self-referential Molly Ringwald Bev comparison, which I was wondering when they were gonna I was looking at the whole thing earlier in the movie. I leaned over to Brad, and I said, she's Molly Ringwald.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, they threw a joke in there, and it was my biggest laugh of the movie. Yeah,
I was just waiting for her to put lipstick on with her, tits. So,
and I think that's one of the smartest parts of this. I agree with you. I disagree a little bit in terms of like the strength of this as an adaptation. But I agree with the core point of it. Like, I need a book to film adaptation. I don't need it to be 100% literal to all of the points. I need it to understand the core concepts that make the book work and translate those to screen. Sometimes that's a looser adaptation. I mean, I think the fact that The Shining works so well is less because it's such a loose adaptation, more because it's Stanley Kubrick, and like, he pretty much just like touches a movie and it turns out gold. Whereas there have been looser Stephen King adaptations that have just gone absolutely to shit. This one here, what worked so well about it is, I mean, it like we talked about it at the beginning, it changed the time frame of this movie entirely. Like a movie based on 1950s Americana and kind of the subversion of it, with the monsters being like classic Hollywood, like Werewolf and Mummy and Creature of the Black Lagoon stuff, has been quote unquote modernized, setting these kids in the 80s, changing the references so that we can have a 2017, 2019, like a future version as adults. But it kept what made the Losers Club, the Losers Club as kids work just as well in the 1950s as they do in the 1989. You could probably tell that same story. You'd have to change some things, obviously, but you could tell that same story with a group of like Outcasts in 2017 as well. Yeah. You change the fluff, you change the details, you change obviously at that point you have to deal with cell phones and all that stuff. But the core concept of a bunch of outsider kids who are able to beat this unstoppable, unthinkable evil just because they're able to band together and overcome their fear out of their friendship. While it's kind of a concept we've seen before, I don't think we often see it executed as gracefully as is with it. And so I think that's where the strength of this is as an adaptation. It got the right parts correct while changing the rest of it to fit the new set dressing.
I think there was a missed opportunity, though, to have it be like, instead of Stand By Me as the core coming of age, to have it be like The Breakfast Club, like coming of age.
That was Power Rangers.
Hey, so we are rapidly dwindling our time. Jim, I wanted to ask you a question because out of the four of us, you were the only one who got to experience both versions of on-screen Pennywise for the first time this weekend. So, hard question: Tim Curry or Bill Skarsgård?
Man, they're both really good. I think I kind of like Tim Curry's because he brought a lot. I think he brought a lot more humor into the role. Like, it tried not to be so like, here I am, I'm going to be as creepy as, and scary as I can. But Tim Curry brought that kind of that lightness, that like evil playfulness, I'll call it, more to the character. And I appreciated that a lot. I like the look. I like the look of this one, but I like the characterization of Tim Curry's better.
Yeah. All right. Good to know. I'm not surprised to hear that because I don't know. It's kind of how I feel about him as well. I really liked the new version of Pennywise, but Sam was saying he's more like ooga booga booga as opposed to just like being slyly evil silly. Yeah, exactly.
It's more jump scares.
I did like this movie overall, though. Not just the character. I like this movie better than the old one. I don't have the nostalgia that maybe you guys have for the old one either. So
no, wait a second. Are you comparing this movie to the full miniseries or night one of the miniseries when they're all kids?
Either. I think this movie, even the problems I had with it, and they are real problems for me, I enjoyed the coming of age part of this so much more than anything in the original movie.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, guys, I think it is time to make a shift and talk about some plugs, but you have one final rapid fire round robin opportunity with regards to it. Any other thoughts you want to get off your chest? Will, go.
No, just go see this movie. It's already made $117 million.
123.
Yeah, it's the largest horror opening, and it's by a non-white male. I think that there's something kind of nice about having someone take that mantle who is person of color, taking a big step forward in a horror genre. So I'm very, very, very excited about this and what it may mean for horror as a whole going forward. All right, Dan, go.
I would say like there was a couple of scenes that threw back to 80s horror movies for me. The blood scene with Bev in the sink was like a straight up throwback to the first Nightmare on Elm Street. The hair coming out of the sink like felt a lot like Nightmare on Elm Street 3, where the guy's being walked around by his veins like a puppet. So I liked a lot of those throwbacks. They had posters everywhere. They made the 80s work for this movie, like you guys were saying earlier, and I thought that was really, really well done.
Awesome. Jim, go.
My final word?
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say see this movie. I'm really anxious to see what they do with the second part of this. I don't know if they've painted themselves in the corner or they've opened things up even wider than it would normally be. But definitely go see it. Can't wait for part 2.
All right. Awesome. Final round for me. I love this movie. Definitely think you should go see it. I'm just super, super worried, you guys, about the second part of this, because yes, we can bring in some of the extra dimensional stuff, some of the metaphysical, like background Pennywise stuff. But at the end of the day, it's just going to be a bunch of like stunt casted adults probably on this adventure is my fear. I don't know that will be the case. I hope it's not. But we'll see. Have there been any casting announcements yet for part 2? I don't think I've seen anything.
I don't think there's been any announcements, but I know there was a video going around of the kids that want of the kids saying who they want to play their roles. And the kid that plays Ben said Chris Pratt to play an adult Ben. I was like, that could work. Because of the chubby to the straight side.
That's great that it would be. I mean, because that was that's the story of Ben. Like a chubby kid who kind of like, loses his weight as he grows up, but it kind of is always mentally, still the fat kid. And I think there's something to be said for that with having an actor who has, been pudgier in his life. So I would be okay with Chris Pratt in that. Although
now I have visions in my head of Chris Pratt like doing the whole raptor thing, like to Pennywise.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I think we can still be good with the adult version, the metaphysical stuff. I'm more heartened by it after watching like the Legion miniseries, which was one of the absolute best things on television the last year. Knowing that you can tell, we now have the technology and kind of the complexity of writing in terms of like scripts to be able to tell like very weird metaphysical stuff. Like we saw it play out effectively and cleanly in Legion. That gives me a lot of hope if they just borrow some of the things that work best there for the script for It Part 2. I'm there all day every day.
All right. Awesome. Hey guys, unequivocally the folks in chat are all voting for Chris Pratt. So Chris Pratt, you have the official Movie Bear podcast vote to play Ben in the upcoming second part of this new It series. Guys, let's go ahead and move on to some
no James Corden votes. I'm surprised.
He's a little old, isn't he?
Yeah, he's also a little overrated. Oh, wait.
James Corden.
Was my mic on?
I don't know. I don't know if he can act at all. I don't know if he can act. In this kind of a role, but yeah, I don't think the character fits him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I don't know. All right, let's move on to some plugs. Let's wrap this thing up. This is the wonderful part of the show where we tell you about something we think you should check out, something we're excited about. Dan, what have you got this week?
So I've got 2. One is Skeleton Crew. It's a YouTube TV show.
I knew you wore that t-shirt. You were like, no, that's not why.
It really was an extra. It really was an extra to my closet. But
are you in that series?
I'm not, but I hung out with a lot of them when I was in New York last month and got to meet the guy that created it.
Get yourself in it. Get yourself in it.
I've tried. It's a work in progress.
Okay.
But it's a really good show. It's on YouTube. There's 2 seasons up now. They're working on the 3rd one. And the guys that do it are all really, really sweet guys. So, and then the other one is a movie I kept seeing previews for this weekend because I went and seen so many movies. Is Suburbicon with Matt Damon. It's directed by George Clooney. I think it's supposed to come out later this month. It's a weird comedy / action movie. And it looks really good. It's got Matt Damon, Julianne Moore. Matt Damon's family gets kind of killed by the mob, and it's the mob still coming after him. So he's trying to hide out and enlist his sister to help him out. It's pretty weird looking, but it's pretty cool.
I've got my eyes on that one too. Although I've been watching Twitter reactions about it too, and it's there because there's 2 big film festivals happening this week at TIFF and Venice, and it's like reactions are all over the place. So yeah, could be good.
It's really good right up into the last scene of the trailer, and you just see an explosion, and then Matt Damon's like trying to get away, but he's pedaling on a little kid's bike instead of like driving away in a car. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, very cool.
All right. Awesome. Will, what have you got this week?
The big thing I want to bring up is something I mentioned sort of at the very beginning of this. I had a chance to attend and help program the Austin Gay and Lesbian International Film Festival, which was over this last weekend. And as always, I do want to kind of preface this by saying, like, if there is a local LGBTQ film festival in your area or nearby, go attend it. Support LGBTQ film. There's a lot of amazing films out there by about queer stories by queer directors that a lot of people in our community overlook because either because of access or just because they are not really sure that those things are out there, that they're good. And I want to let you know unequivocally they are quite good. I saw just 13 new features and 19 new short films over the weekend, in addition to the 50 plus hours of films I screened, kind of helping to set up the festival. There's so many good ones that are coming out at some point in the future that you guys should absolutely know about. But I think the one that is most important for this particular crew and this particular audience is I had a chance to see the Tom of Finland movie. And when you guys get a chance to see this biopic, and it's got distribution, I don't remember the actual date, but it's very soon. You need to absolutely see the Tom of Finland movie. It's a biopic about the artist who did like all this classic Leather and Cop and scantily clad / actively fucking sketches that were such a big part of like gay culture, kind of when we had to be more underground with things and we're kind of passing around art. It's a good little biopic. It is fucking hot as well. Like, there's so much man meat in that movie. It does not shy away from showing the goods. So support queer cinema and support Tom of Finland when it's available in your area.
I can smell the leather from here.
Oh, so much leather.
All right, Jim, what have you got?
I have an anti-plug. So I don't know what you call it, but it's kind of an anti-plug. I want to tell people to stay away from a movie, I think, which is odd. But
I know where this is going.
So quick story. Over the weekend, we had a guest, Sammy from the chat here. We decided to go to Biosphere 2, which is something I've lived here for almost 20 years, and I've never gone to the Biosphere. And I've had a curiosity about it. So thank you to Sammy W for getting us to go there, because it was awesome. The Biosphere was great. I'd recommend that over this movie any day. But all the way to the Biosphere, Brad and Sammy are cracking jokes about Pauly Shore in a movie called Biodome from 1996. Because
Biodome, buddy.
Biodome, buddy. And so we get home, we're all jazzed. Like, we're going to watch this. Yeah, it's a silly movie, but we'll see. Guess what? We'll see the Biosphere in it, right? And it'll be great. So we turn it on, and man, it is awful. Like from the very get-go, it is like nonsensical, annoying. Like it's got Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin in it. Those are the two main dudes, and it's just the most inane thing I've ever seen in my life. And to top it off, the real biosphere is not in the movie at all, so, at least from what I saw. So yeah, stay away from Biodome. If you come across this movie and you think you're going to just watch some mindless, entertaining stuff, no. It's like less than 5% on Rotten Tomatoes. Not that Rotten Tomatoes is the be-all and end-all, but I'm just saying in this case, I think they nailed it.
Jim, I'm gonna co-sign your plug. I didn't actually think I didn't think you were gonna bring this up as a plug, so I was planning on doing the exact same thing. But I will say it was interesting revisiting that period of film time, because I'm like, God, what were people smoking in the 90s that like Pauly Shore was ever so popular? Oh God, it was. Yeah,
it always reminds me of it was Pauly Shore because he did that. He did Son-in-Law, and then there was
Encino Man.
Encino Man. At least Encino Man, I recognize that as a bad movie, but I remember I like enjoying it enough as a kid that it coasts by, whereas some of the others don't. But I also think about, and it's not the same guy, but I remember Carrot Top had a movie called Chairman of the Board around that same time. And I always think about Chairman of the Board and the Biodome movies kind of in the same thought. Like they were spawned by the same brain for the same audience.
Don't tell me there was another one. Like, maybe there was a Biodome too. I hope not.
I think there might have been.
Oh,
I don't think it was with Pauly Shore, but I think.
Okay. Anyway, like I said, this movie seems like it was almost made by people who are high for people who are high. But I don't even think if I was high, I would have liked this movie. I don't know, maybe, but I doubt it. Anyway, enough about that movie.
Sammy says he agrees with this anti-plug. So there's 3 anti-plugs for Biodome. In any event, hey, I just want to give a big quick thank you to Dan McCord. Dan, it's been great having you on the show this week. Even if you are back for a horror movie, you don't always have to come for horror movies. So if there's something else you want to talk about, just let us know.
Okay, I can do that.
All right. Sounds good. Hey, want to give a big shout out to those of you who joined us in the chat this week. Woo, chat was going at 1,000,000 miles.
It was great this week. It was awesome.
Very hard to keep up with. I'm so sorry if we didn't get to everybody. But Steve and Edward and JP and Sammy and everybody else in the chat. I know we had some folks that were here for the pre-spoiler section, like Bobby. Glad you guys joined us this week. Those of you listening via digital tape delay on iTunes, my brain was mixing things up there. Definitely, we love you guys too. Some news. We're working on getting the podcast onto Spotify. So those of you who don't use iTunes, who hate Stitcher Radio for whatever reason, we're hoping to get things up and running on Spotify for you so that you can access the show that way rather than having to go through our website. Still working out some of the kinks in terms of like reporting and numbers. Not that we really care about those things that much, but it is, it's nice to know if people are listening when you're doing your thing. In any event, keep an eye out for that. Guys, as we look to wrap up with finality here, Dan, if people want to interact with you online, where can they find you in a totally not creepy, not stalkery way?
I am Dan McCord on Facebook, DMcCord82 on Twitter, and I just set up a Letterboxd account. So I am Knox Movie Bear on there.
We'll get you on there. Awesome.
Excellent. All right. Jim, how about you?
I'm at JJP Out West, all one word, at Twitter. And you can also find me on Facebook under my regular name, Jim Pugliafico.
All right. Will Lindis, how about you?
Let's see. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Whatever Cove. You can find me on Facebook. I'm William Lindis. Just send me a message first if you're going to add me. Chances are, if you're like a bearish dude and you add me, I know where you're coming from. But at the same time, just let me know that you're not just some random dude on the internet, and that that you're listening to the show, and I'll happily add you. Also, I'll glad you as well. Oh boy, will I. And then on Letterboxd, you can find me there as well. Just do a search for William Lindis, and I'll show up there. So yeah, find me online.
All right. Awesome. And you can cash me inside the movie theater. How about that? No, sorry, that joke is so played out at this point. But hey, you can find me on Twitter at iBradPro. It's up here on the screen for you if you're watching via YouTube. If not, again, that was at iBradPro. I love movies, but I love TV way more than movies. So that's what I tend to tweet about. So if you want to chat movies or TV, feel free to hit me up. Same as on Facebook. Add me. I'm Brad Harris. I'm not the gun nut from Wyoming. I am the one in Arizona that has hopefully very hunky friends that you're like, I would fuck him and him and him and him. So in any event, like Will says, send a message first, please. A few folks have done that over the last few weeks. It's been kind of nice. I've made some new film friends. So to those of you who are new because of the show, big heart on for you. Welcome.
And by fuck, you mean see a movie with, right? Netflix and chill?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Why not both?
Exactly. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, we love all of you guys. We are long in the tooth. We're going to wrap this shit up, but we will see you next week. God, I don't even know what we're going to be reviewing next week, guys. We gotta strategize and plan here, but we'll figure it out, and we'll see y'all next time. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.